A historic twist has just shaken up the global geopolitical stage. After months of announcing the end of U.S. military support for Ukraine, Donald Trump surprised the world by saying that NATO would be financing Ukrainian weapons.
Frankly, Russian soldiers are being killed at a higher rate than the Ukrainian soldiers.
We are witnessing a radical shift in American strategy, and this could completely change the direction of the conflict in Eastern Europe. But hold on, because the story behind this decision is way more complex than it looks. Let's figure out together how we got here and what this move really means for the future of the region. To understand the magnitude of what's going on, we need to go back a few months. In March 2025, after a tense meeting in the Oval Office with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump made a decision that rattled capitals across the world, immediately suspending all American military aid to Ukraine. The decision came after what White House sources described as a combative encounter, where Trump pressured Zelensky to accept peace talks with Russia. The American president didn't just pause arms deliveries, he also publicly announced that the United States would no longer seek congressional approval for new military funding for Kyiv. This move represented a complete break from the policy of his predecessor, Joe Biden, who had authorized more than $86 billion in military aid since the start of the conflict in February 2022. The message looked clear. The United States was walking away from the game. During a cabinet meeting in September, Trump even celebrated what he called a historic milestone, declaring that the United States was no longer funding Ukraine's defense. For many analysts, that position seemed final until everything changed. While Trump was sticking to his public stance of not directly supporting Ukraine, behind the scenes, a sophisticated diplomatic plan was being built. The solution they found was as clever as it was controversial: shift the financing responsibility to European allies, while still keeping American weapons in play. On September 17, 2025, two sources familiar with the matter confirmed to Reuters that the Trump administration had approved the first weapons packages for Ukraine under a completely new mechanism, the Ukraine Priority Requirements List, known by its acronym PEARL. This system, developed jointly by NATO and the United States, allows NATO member states to voluntarily finance the delivery of American weapons and technology to Kyiv. To understand the brilliance of this system, we need to dive into the technical details of how it actually works. PEARL represents the most sophisticated multinational military coordination operation ever seen in modern times. The process starts with Ukraine itself identifying its most urgent battlefield needs, anything from artillery shells to advanced air defense systems. These needs are then submitted to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, who validates and prioritizes each item based on real-time military intelligence and strategic assessments. The final word on what gets onto the list doesn't come from Washington, but from Norfolk, Virginia, where NATO's SACEUR headquarters is. That creates an extra layer of military legitimacy and removes the decision from the U.S. political arena. Once the priority list is approved, it's distributed to all 32 NATO member countries, plus Canada. Each nation can then voluntarily choose to finance specific items, creating a system where the demand is clear, the supply is flexible, and the coordination is centralized. It's like a military catalog where each country can pick what they want to buy for Ukraine. The most impressive thing is the speed of the system. While the U.S. Congress traditionally took months to approve military aid packages, PEARL can process a request in just weeks. As soon as a member country commits to funding an item from the list, the U.S. can start prepping the shipment immediately from its stockpiles. Each package is standardized at around $500 million, creating a predictable and sustainable pace of deliveries. The Netherlands was the pioneer, financing the first full package in August 2025, followed quickly by Germany with another package of the same value. The logistics coordination is handled by NATO, which makes sure there are no duplications or gaps in deliveries. Real-time tracking systems let both funders and the Ukrainian military know exactly where each item is in the delivery pipeline. The political genius of this approach is in its simplicity. Trump can claim he's not spending American money on Ukraine, while still supplying the most advanced weapons from a U.S. arsenal. It's a strategy that satisfies both his domestic political base and the international pressure to keep backing Ukrainian resistance. Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, Elbridge Colby, authorized two initial shipments of $500 million each from U.S. Army stockpiles. We're talking about $1 billion worth of cutting-edge military equipment that will be in Ukrainian hands in the coming weeks. But what makes this approval even more significant is the timing. It comes at a critical moment in the conflict when Ukrainian forces are facing increasing pressure on multiple fronts. The first shipment is already being prepped and is expected to include critical air defense systems, according to Pentagon sources. The Pearl mechanism represents a fundamental shift in the way the West coordinates military aid to Ukraine. Unlike earlier packages, which depended on U.S. congressional approvals and complex bureaucratic processes, this new system allows faster responses to urgent battlefield needs. One of the most important features of these new shipments is the focus on air defense systems. Sources close to the negotiations revealed that missiles for Patriot systems are among the first items on the priority list. That's no coincidence. It's a direct response to the escalation of Russian air attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. President Zelensky personally confirmed that air defense missiles make up most of these first shipments. At a press conference, he highlighted that these systems represent the difference between life and death for millions of Ukrainian civilians. The choice reflects not only military needs, but also fundamental humanitarian concerns. The urgency of these shipments became dramatically clear just yesterday, September 16th, when Russian drones directly attacked Kharkiv's Pharmacy University. The attack left 13 civilians injured and turned an educational institution into yet another symbol of the indiscriminate brutality of this conflict. Images of the university's burning roof spread across the world, showing that no place, not even schools, are safe from Russian airstrikes. The timing of this attack can't be ignored. It happened exactly as NATO and the U.S. were finalizing the details of the first air defense shipments under the new Pearl system. It was as if Moscow wanted to remind the world why these systems are so desperately needed. Right after the attack, Ukrainian officials renewed their urgent appeals to NATO to speed up the delivery of air defense systems. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha described the attack on civilians during class hours as absolute evil and directly called on international partners for enhanced air defense capabilities. This sequence of events, the attack on the university, followed by the direct plea for help, created irresistible political and moral pressure on Western leaders. How could they deny protection systems when drones were literally falling on students and teachers? The answer came in the form of the fast-tracked approval of the first packages under the Pearl system, with Patriot missiles specifically prioritized to counter this type of threat. The Pentagon and U.S. military officials in Europe are working directly with NATO members to accelerate the delivery of more Patriot systems and release munitions that had been briefly suspended. This coordination marks a significant shift in White House policy toward Russia, signaling a more assertive stance despite Trump's public statements. The numbers behind this new initiative are truly impressive and show the real commitment of European allies to Ukraine's cause. According to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, in just a few weeks, the Pearl system has already funneled $2 billion in urgent military aid to Ukraine. The Netherlands was the first country to effectively participate, fully funding the first package under the new initiative. Then Germany announced a contribution of $500 million for American-made military equipment and munitions for Kyiv. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden also made significant contributions, initially totaling $1 billion. These numbers mean way more than simple financial transactions. They show a Europe willing to take greater responsibility for its own security, exactly what Trump had been demanding for years. It's a historic irony that his pressure for greater European defense spending is now directly benefiting Ukraine. But there's another crucial factor behind this European rush to fund Ukrainian weapons with their own money, and it has everything to do with a very real threat coming directly from Kremlin. Moscow has clearly warned that any attempt to confiscate the $285 billion in frozen Russian assets in Europe will be met with devastating retaliation. The situation is more tense than it seems. The European Union holds approximately €210 billion in frozen Russian assets since the 2022 invasion. Right now, only the interest from those resources is being directed to support Ukraine, about €2.1 billion already in 2025, with projections that this scheme will generate between 15 and 20 billion euros by 2027. However, pressure to fully confiscate those assets is growing in several European capitals. And this is exactly where the Russian threat becomes real and frightening. The Kremlin has already made it clear that it holds about $285 billion in Western investments inside Russia that could be seized in retaliation. This isn't an empty threat. Russia has already shown its willingness to act, confiscating physical assets from European companies, and, in a symbolic but significant move, seizing $440 million from JP Morgan accounts just hours after President Biden signed the Repo Act, which makes it easier to use frozen Russian assets. The math is simple and terrifying. If Europe confiscates 210 billion euros from Russia, Moscow can retaliate by confiscating $285 billion from Europe. It's a negative-sum game where everyone loses, but Europe loses more. That reality is forcing European leaders to look for creative alternatives, like voluntarily funding American weapons through the Pearl system. The mechanism works in a relatively straightforward way. NATO countries identify the necessary equipment from a list coordinated with Ukrainian forces and confirmed by the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Allies then voluntarily fund those items, which are supplied directly from U.S. stockpiles. NATO coordinates the deliveries, ensuring efficiency and avoiding duplication. The Kremlin's response to these changes reveals a lot about how Moscow views this new setup. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, suggested that Trump's decision to supply American weapons to Ukraine through NATO is just a continuation of Biden's policies under a different disguise. That statement, meant to sound dismissive, actually shows real concern. The fact is the weapons are still flowing, the systems remain the same, and Ukraine's military capacity keeps getting stronger. What we're witnessing could represent the birth of a new paradigm in transatlantic security. Trump managed to create a system where Europeans take on more of the financial responsibility for their own security, while the United States maintains its technological and military-industrial supremacy. This approach solves several issues at once. For Trump, it lets him keep saying he's not spending American money on Ukraine, which pleases his political base. For Europeans, it gives them access to the most advanced weapons in the world. For Ukraine, it guarantees continued deliveries of critical equipment. In the medium term, this model could expand far beyond the current conflict. Imagine a system where Europe regularly finances the acquisition of American military technology for its own defense needs. That would create even deeper economic and strategic interdependence across the Atlantic. The timing of this shift is crucial too. With European elections coming up and growing budget pressures in several NATO countries, showing concrete results in supporting Ukraine is essential to keeping the alliance united. Looking ahead, this new mechanism could represent a natural evolution in how the West coordinates responses to international crises. The idea that the United States will always lead financially in these kinds of operations is clearly being questioned and reshaped. Zelensky expressed cautious optimism about this change, pointing out that Ukraine hopes the $3.5 billion fund for American weapons will help sustain the fight against Russia. That amount, while substantial, is only a fraction of what will be needed to maintain Ukraine's defensive capacity in the long run. What's interesting is that this approach could speed up decision-making. While the U.S. Congress often took months to approve aid packages, the Pearl system allows responses in just weeks. For a conflict where timing can mean the difference between victory and defeat, that agility is priceless. What we're seeing goes way beyond just a change in American foreign policy. We're witnessing the birth of a new model of shared responsibility in global security, where the United States provides the technology and allies take on more of the financial burden.